Are you ready? Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Nick Langworthy, and I proudly represent New York's 23rd Congressional District in Western New York. And it's great to see so many familiar faces joining me here today that I worked so closely with through the FAA reauthorization process in the last Congress. All the stakeholders joining us here today are passionate about airline safety and protecting the future of this critical industry in the United States. And I'm honored to join you today as one of the founders of the Aviation Safety Caucus. I started this caucus with our co-chairs, Congressman Mark Veazey and Congressman Jack Bergman. Unfortunately, due to the changes in this week's schedule, couldn't be here with us today. This caucus focuses on reaching across the aisle to find legislative solutions to protect aviation safety and security. We didn't want to wait until it's time for another FAA reauthorization every 5 years. We wanted to be working on these issues all year round because the issue is that critical to have a year-round focus on keeping our skies safe and our flying public safe and important airline personnel safe. Everyone who gets on a flight, whether you're a passenger, a pilot, a crew member, they expect to reach their destination safely because they're accustomed to the high standards of safety and professionalism that defines the United States aviation industry. With the rise of social media and more widespread accounting of airline incidents, it's more important now than ever to dedicate ourselves to the mission of the Aviation Safety Caucus. Today I have reintroduced the Safer Skies Act for the 119th Congress, which builds on the security reforms enacted after 9/11 and is designed to address the critical vulnerability that exists in our current aviation system. The Safer Skies Act will require the TSA to update its security screening requirements for Part 135 and Part 380 operators, those that offer the purchase of individual seats in advance, provide publicly available schedules, and operate aircraft with more than 9 seats. These operators will now be held to the same security standards under this bill as any other scheduled commercial airline. This common sense measure would ensure that no passenger bypasses rigorous screening and we keep our skies safe from terrorists. Due to the reforms that followed the 9/11 attacks, Americans have come to expect a very high level of safety and security when they board a plane on American soil. But there is this loophole, one that has allowed certain providers and operators, like ticketed charter flights, to circumvent these requirements, and it creates a great vulnerability throughout the system. The Safer Skies Act will close that loophole. We must keep these standards the same across the board and let no one cheat the system. As I have often repeated, safety should never be compromised by a business decision. And that goes for someone trying to make a buck or someone trying to pay a little extra to avoid the hassle. As the chair of the Aviation Safety Caucus, I work very closely with our partners and our experts in the federal government and the aviation industry to identify existing security gaps. And this one is glaring. This legislation is just one piece of the overall puzzle that we need to solve. The work of this caucus is dedicated to maintaining the highest safety standards, not just against terrorism, but in all elements of aviation safety. For those of you that don't know my background and why I've made aviation safety a major focus of my policy portfolio, I represent Western New York in Congress. On February 9, 2009, when I was a congressional staff member, Colgan Air Flight 3407, approaching the Buffalo Niagara International Airport, lost control, and it crashed like a dart into a single home in Clarence, New York, in what is now my district, killing all 45 passengers, 2 pilots, 2 flight attendants, and 1 person on the ground. As a congressional staffer that day, I saw firsthand the aftermath of the crash. I'll never forget the aftermath of the crash as we comforted and worked with families trying to pick up the pieces of their lives that were broken that day and shattered. And it's seared into the collective memory of our community. I got to know the families. I attended the funerals. And when you experience something like that, when you share the pain of the heartbreak with people that have lost loved ones, it changes how you view things like safety policies. So many of us go through life thinking it'll never happen to me. But the reality is safety cannot for 1 minute be taken for granted. What the families did next was nothing short of amazing. They turned the most tragic moment in their lives into a catalyst for real change. And they decided they could not let this happen to other families. They turned their grief into action, bold action. And they took this hill. And they went to Washington and they demanded higher safety standards for pilots across the board. Because there was a two-tier system of training, regional carriers to the big national carriers. Their advocacy efforts led to major reforms included in the Airline Safety and FAA Extension Act of 2010, such as the 1,500-hour in-flight training requirement for pilots and the requirement that the carrier be disclosed immediately at the time of ticket purchase. As a freshman congressman, it was a tough decision to take on leaders in my own party of Congress over this issue. It would have been easy to kind of go along and be part of the status quo and go along and get along, but I've seen firsthand the potential consequences of relaxing our safety standards. And I had to stand up against the changes that were attempted to be made in the FAA reauthorization, where they tried to replace in-cockpit training hours with on-the-ground simulator time. It was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do for the families of 3407 and the memories of the loved ones that they lost. But it was more important to do for the current flying public. Reducing the amount of real flight experience a pilot needs could have jeopardized the hard-won victories and safety gains of the past decade. Today it is my responsibility and the responsibility of our caucus to ensure that those hard-won safety standards are not eroded. We must continue to improve and maintain the safeguards and protections of the passengers and crew from preventable tragedies. And as we look into the future, we must recognize that airline safety standards must evolve to meet the challenges posed by new technology. But they must do so in a way that maintains the integrity of airline travel in the United States. We must continue to invest in technology and training. And we must be vigilant on our oversight and regulatory frameworks. That includes holding all commercial air carriers, big and small, to the same stringent safety standards that have kept passengers and crew safe for decades. And as we move forward, I look forward to continuing our conversation around these important issues, ensuring that our aviation industry remains the safest in the world. This is not just about regulations and standards, it's about the lives of the people that fly each and every day. The lives of the traveling public that take their safety for granted, and the lives of the industry and the professionals like those assembled behind me that make it their livelihood. So thank you all for your partnership in this critical mission. And I now welcome Captain Ambrosi, the president of ALPA. Captain.
On behalf of nearly 80,000 pilots across 42 airlines, thank you for being here today. Thank you, Representative Langworthy, and your colleagues in the Aviation Safety Caucus for your leadership and for prioritizing aviation safety and security. Security and safety must always be the primary focus of our industry. The stakes are too high to allow any gaps or loopholes in the armor that Americans depend on to keep aviation secure. Every day, we operate tens of thousands of flights, carrying millions of passengers in the United States, and each and every one of them expects consistent and effective security procedures regardless of their airline, origin, or destination. On September 11th, 2001, we witnessed what can happen when there is inadequate aviation security. And as a nation, we vow to never forget and never let it happen again. In the decades since, we've built a security mentality and structure that works. We must never stop improving, and we certainly should never cut corners, because our enemies will always look for our weaknesses. Currently, some carriers operate scheduled flights with ticketed passengers under Part 135 and Part 380 regulations, which do not have the same level of security screening. That can mean the same type of aircraft operating out of the same airports could do so without the same security screening standards to which all other airline operations are held. That is absolutely unacceptable. Allowing Part 135 and Part 380 operators to take advantage of less strict security protocols introduces risk into our aviation system. Passengers deserve the same high level of aviation security regardless of their departure point and destination, and ALPA is grateful for Representative Langworthy and his colleagues for their leadership on this issue. By addressing the security threats created by the current loophole, we close a dangerous precedent that will spark a race to the bottom and continue to undermine aviation security. Carriers should compete on routes and services, but we must never allow them to compete based on safety or less strict security procedures. Americans, regardless of whether they live in a large metropolitan area like here in DC or a rural community, deserve the same level of safety and security. The Safer Skies Act is one important step toward what our industry needs at this critical moment. Representative Langworthy, thank you for your leadership on the Aviation Safety Caucus at this important time in our history. And again, Representative Langworthy and your colleagues, thank you for your continued leadership to close the security threat created by this loophole. Americans depend on demand safe and secure airline operations, and this bill is a critical step in ensuring every flight on every airline is secure. Thank you.
Next, we'd like to welcome forward Alex Roberts, who's a DCA-based flight attendant and a representative of the APFA.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Roberts, and I'm a flight attendant and a member of APFA, the Association of Professional Flight Attendants, the union representing my 28,000 colleagues at American Airlines. As crew members, we provide care to 3 million travelers in the United States every day. But above all, we are safety professionals trained to respond to onboard threats, medical emergencies, and evacuation orders. We are truly the last line of defense for passenger safety in the skies. This responsibility is why I'm here today speaking in support of the Safer Skies Act, which ensures that every passenger traveling through our airspace has been properly screened. Flight attendants rely on the professionalism of many work groups tasked with maintaining security, including the critical role of Transportation Security Administration. Flight crews and the flying public are safer when TSA workers are able to perform their duties on all passenger flights, ensuring there are no weapons or substances on board that can compromise the integrity of those flights. No passenger should be exempt from this screening, and we thank the 47,000 TSA agents who keep us safe every day on every flight. In fact, the very creation of TSA was in response to the worst terrorist attack in American history on September 11, 2001. I was just 5 years old then, but I still remember it vividly. I remember it because my mother was a flight attendant, and she was on duty that awful day. One of my earliest childhood memories was standing in the living room watching images of the attack on and that is why it is so essential to pass the Safer Skies Act. 9/11 changed our industry and our country forever, and this bill helps fulfill the promise to maintain aircraft security, protect passengers on board, and ensure our aircraft are never weaponized again. Thank you to Representative Langworthy, Representative Vesey, Representative Bergman, and to the many co-sponsors for demonstrating that nothing is more bipartisan than protecting American lives. On behalf of myself, APFA, and the broader aviation community, we urge the passage of this bill. Thank you very much.
And next, we will welcome forward Sarah Nelson, President of AFA.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Nelson. I'm the president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, representing 55,000 flight attendants at 20 different airlines. And with me here today is the president of our PSA chapter, Lee Wilkes, here to say thank you, Congressman, for forming the Aviation Safety Caucus. This is not something that we can take for granted, and it is something that we absolutely must be focused on every single day. Aviation safety and security happens every single day because hundreds of thousands of aviation workers, from the people who build the planes, engineer the planes, get the parts, the people who are inspecting the planes, do maintenance regularly, the people who are checking people in at the airports, the people who are screening our passengers, and with the law enforcement that are working with them behind the scenes, the people who are flying our planes, and the people who are working on our planes. We are asking all day long, every single day, is it safe? And because we do that, passengers can take that for granted. Now, I'm not only the president of the Association of Flight Attendants. I'm a Boston-based United Airlines flight attendant who lost my friends on a route that I normally flew on September 11, 2001. Flight 175 flew into the South Tower of the World Trade Center, and you can picture it because all cameras were trained on that site because American Flight 11 had flown into the North Tower 17 minutes earlier. I know the exact moment that Amy, Michael, another Amy, Catherine, Al, Robert, Alicia, Marianne, and Jesus lost their lives. I know what it's like when the planes stop. We all know. We all know the grief that we held in our hearts and the desire to pick up and rebuild our lives. But we also know what happened because of that. Safety and security must be in place if we have economic security. Millions of workers lost their pensions, took pay cuts. We took a step backward in aviation because we couldn't attract people to these jobs to do this work. Everything starts with safety and security. The TSA was formed in order to make sure that safety and security is not sold at the lowest price with the highest cost for our country. When TSA was created, we federalized the workforce and we connected to all the other security agencies and law enforcement agencies that do this work. TSA screeners do not just look for liquids and knives and guns and other weapons. They work with the critical analysis of an entire network of law enforcement that determines the potential risks so that we can plug those holes, mitigate those risks, and make sure that we continue to run a safe operation. It is disgusting that there are people who are gaming the system to use what we call the scheduled charter loophole of Part 135 flying with a 380 waiver that has ballooned over the last 10 years and has been used as a reason for people to buy tickets on their airline. They sell these tickets by telling people that you can avoid TSA security for the price of a first-class ticket. Our safety and security is not for sale. We stand with Congressman Langworthy, he stands with us, and every single member of Congress better get on this bill right away, because if they do not, we will know where they stand. They fly on their planes, and they're going to have to answer to us. Thank you.
Next, we'd like to welcome Captain Kyle Moore from the Southwest Pilots Association, the head of their Government Affairs Committee.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyle Moore. I'm a captain with Southwest Airlines, and I have the privilege of representing the over 11,000 pilots of Southwest Airlines Pilots Association. Every day, we make safety our top priority every time we step into a cockpit. Aviation safety is built on rigorous standards that ensure passengers, crew members, and the public can trust that every flight operates under the highest levels of security. However, a loophole has allowed certain operators to bypass the security measures that have been fundamental, protecting our skies since 9/11. The Safer Skies Act is a crucial step in closing that loophole, ensuring that all flights, regardless of the operator, adhere to the same security protocols that commercial carriers follow every single day. We cannot allow a two-tiered security system to exist, one where some flights are held to a rigorous standard while others operate with weaker protections. The American people expect and deserve better. This is why we are proud to stand in full support of the Safer Skies Act. This bill is about fairness, security, and most importantly, ensuring that every passenger and every crew member can fly with confidence. On behalf of the Southwest Pilots Association, we strongly support this bill. We urge Congress to act swiftly to pass it and protect the integrity of our aviation system. On behalf of the thousands of pilots we represent, we thank Congressman Langworthy and his colleagues for taking decisive action to strengthen aviation security. We look forward to working together to pass this bill and make our skies safe for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And lastly, we will welcome Andrea Thiemley, an APA representative.
Hi, I'm Captain Andrea Thiemley, and on behalf of the 16,000 American Airlines pilots that make up the Allied Pilots Association, we strongly support the Safer Skies Act of 2025. We want to thank Representative Langworthy, Representative Beasy, and Representative Bergman, as well as all of the other co-sponsors for their leadership in addressing this critical loophole in U.S. charter flight regulatory guidance. As airline professionals, you've already heard, we witnessed firsthand the horrific acts of September 11th, 2001, and we never want a repeat of that tragic day in our nation's history. We're concerned that our collective memory of that event is way too short, as evidenced by some charter operations that have lost focus on security in favor of financial profits. The Safer Skies Act addresses the security gap and brings those priorities back into focus by enforcing a single security standard for all air travel. The American public deserves confidence in their safety and security while traveling, and this bill is a great first step in addressing this loophole and restoring confidence in our aviation sector. Thank you to Congressman Langworthy for his leadership on this.
Take any questions you have now. Yes, ma'am.
Leah Freedom, Breckray Television. I know this is a bipartisan caucus. Do you feel confident about having this bill go forward and get a vote on the House floor?
Well, we're going to be, telling the story as to why we need to focus on aviation safety every single day, and I think it was very articulately laid out the case. And I tell you, I wouldn't want to knock on my door if I wasn't on board with this legislation. Members of Congress fly every single week, but this loophole needs to be plugged. This is just a matter of common sense. Just because someone has the means to buy what is essentially a first-class fare shouldn't allow you to avoid the safety and security that is necessary for any flight. I think this is something that certainly deserves a vote. We'll be fighting hard to move it on the floor and get a Senate companion so that we can make this law. Because there needs to be one standard, just like as I talked about in my remarks. We need to have one standard for pilots, whether you were a regional carrier or a big national carrier. One standard to keep everyone safe. And we're taking everybody's life into the hands of the professionals in the cockpit. But the idea that we could have a loophole like this, our adversaries that seek to do our country harm look for vulnerabilities across the system each and every day. And this one is glaring. And for a very cheap fare, they can end up avoiding all of the standards that we put in place, and it's all for naught if someone can weaponize an aircraft against a building or any other target. So the time for this is now, and I'll be fighting hard to get my colleagues on board. We're very impressed with the bipartisan array of co-sponsors we've been able to achieve, and it's in large part because of the great work of the people assembled behind me who are working tirelessly on this legislation and truly creating a grassroots effort to bring this. These scheduled charters don't fly out of every city. They don't fly out of my district, but they fly out of a lot of our metropolitan areas, the bigger ones in the country. And we really need to plug this hole in order to maintain the peace of mind for the flying. Yes.
Well, to that point, like how many of these flights are there on a regular basis, and how many of these charter companies are there? And if I can ask more broadly for the Aviation caucus, we obviously just saw some very high-profile events. Is there more legislation that you can preview that we should expect to see coming?
Well, I don't think we're in a legislative fix at this point. I had a very great conversation this week with Secretary Duffy, actually during the recess week, to discuss the findings of the NTSB and the FAA actions on that. And I do think this was a very preventable tragedy. It wasn't due to the efforts of the pilot or the airline that tragedy happened. It was because of traffic around DCA. I think that has now come to a close, and we're not going to see that anytime soon. And it's something that Secretary Duffy is very serious about. It obviously happened on the first day, the day he was sworn in as cabinet secretary. And we can never allow that to happen again here in Washington, D.C. And just the real tragedy here, we had about a 14-year window with no aviation disasters in the United States of America. And from this tragedy, we have to be vigilant and see that there's no interference with our flight paths in and out of DCA or any airport for that matter. And the fact that that was going on for years and we hadn't had a tragedy is probably a miracle. But the loss of life is immense. Those families will never be made whole. And we have to ensure that that never happens again. I'm not sure it requires any sort of legislative fix, though, because the airline was doing what it needed to do. The pilots made no errors. It was the unfortunate decision to allow that helicopter traffic into that same airspace on approach to the runways. In terms of the charter,
this is not a small problem. It's well over 100,000 flights a year are happening under this loop. And that's only going to get bigger if it's allowed to continue. As the Congressman said so well, this is something that if it continues, it'll begin a race to the bottom. That's more flights than many of our regional carriers do per year. All of us operate the rules the right way. Some do not. And if it's allowed to get worse, you'll see more airlines attempt to follow.
Loopholes are exploited in the system. People are doing it for profit. They're doing it for ease of their life. If you want to play for Mr. Big Bucks and go, charter an aircraft, God bless you. But if the plane has got a scheduled takeoff and a scheduled landing, and they sell it by the seat, that is a commercial flight, and it should not have a separate standard of security than any other flight in America. And it is just unconscionable that this loophole has been exploited in 100,000 flights a year. It is a drastic and hopefully, our press conference here today and our advocacy on Capitol Hill will get people to wake up that this is a major vulnerability in our safety and security, and we're going to be bringing this, to the attention of DHS, that this is a serious national security threat. Yes, Rick.
With your party controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, are you more confident that you'll be able to convince your party to get this bill across the finish line soon?
Well, I think this is something that is post-partisan. This isn't a matter, there's not a Republican or Democrat way to tackle airline safety and security. We have built this caucus in a bipartisan fashion on purpose. so that we can make progress no matter who's in the White House, no matter who's controlling the gavel in the House or the Senate, because we didn't look at those victims of the crash at DCA as Democrats and Republicans. I don't know what anyone's party affiliation is, and I don't believe that this is a partisan issue. This is about doing the right thing all the time, and that's what we have to focus on.
And a question more broadly, as part of the safety caucus, I know you said that you don't necessarily have any legislative priorities right now when it comes to things like the crash at DCA, but how about more broadly when it comes to FAA controllers and the job losses that we've seen? Can you address that, and is there any legislative priorities you have as a caucus?
It is one thing I'm very excited about is Secretary Duffy's plans to really upgrade our air traffic control system in this country. It's long overdue, and it's going to be very expensive. But he's going to be putting forward that bold initiative at the direction of the president to bring that into the 21st century and beyond. We need to have the best trained workforce in air traffic control. We have to have the best equipment and technology, and we need to look across the globe as to who has the perfect system. These towers are run on very antiquated systems, and it's far time that we get with a program and invest in necessary money to bring that up to speed. It has been kind of starved out for far too long, the equipment and the technology, and I don't know if we could have avoided through better technology the air traffic control crisis that existed that day, but I do know we need more controllers and we need more to go into this profession. It's a great job opportunity for people, and we need, I urge Secretary Duffy to, let's look to expand our recruitment efforts. He's working on that very diligently, but we need to be graduating more of the best and brightest to take on the career of air traffic controllers so that we don't have a shortage, we don't have stress undue on that workforce. And they have a very early retirement age, and that's by design because it's a high-stress, high-hour job. But recruiting more people into it, showing them that there's a very good competitive salary attached to it is a way that we can attract more young people to look at that career. But making sure that when they go into looking at air traffic control, they see they're working with state-of-the-art equipment that is a rival of any system in the world is a better way to attract talent. And I think that we can accomplish that. I know it's an objective of President Trump, and will certainly be something I fight hard for in Congress to make sure that we deliver those much-needed dollars to modernizing and making a state-of-the-art air traffic control system.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you, everyone.